Q&A time. As promised, I'm doing a hopefully brief Q&A session here. I've got all your questions written down. If you're wondering where all these questions came from, they came from my Patreon page. So my patrons asked these questions. I have just a few here that I'm going to answer, and I'm hoping to come back and do these. So if anything I say here sparks more questions, just throw them on in the comments below here, or head over to my Patreon page, become a patron, and ask me any question you like at any time, and I will answer because I'm at your service. So let's dive right in. First question: how are you feeling these days about alcohol inks, and will they make an appearance in your future projects on Patreon? Okay, we're starting with a tricky question. I have a super duper love-hate relationship with alcohol inks. Alcohol inks, I owe a lot to them. They are responsible for sort of the launch of my business, really. I became a full-time artist about 6 years ago, and at the time I was marbling paper. If some of you have been following me since then you know that that's sort of my backbone, is marbling. I always go back to it, take long breaks from it, because it is rather monotonous and labor intensive and requires a whole lot of setup. Sometimes I just need a break from it. So I always go back, but currently taking an extended break. During one of these breaks from marbling, I decided to dabble with alcohol inks. And lo and behold, I timed it just perfectly with the shift with alcohol inks from being sort of a crafty, scrapbooky thing to full on like art form. And I was able to sort of master some techniques and develop some new techniques that hadn't been seen, just because everything was so new and fresh. And that led to the creation of my alcohol ink e-course, which just went over like gangbusters. I think a couple thousand people have taken it at this point, and it just made alcohol inks kind of blow up. So I rode that wave, and it brought me from something like 700 followers to 15,000 followers in, 6 months. It was incredible. I sold a lot of artwork, taught a lot of classes, and I have so much to be grateful for with alcohol inks. But in that time period that I was taking my break from marbling and focusing on the inks, I realized quite a few things. First, and most importantly, alcohol inks are not archival. So you cannot make art that will withstand the test of time and that will be heirloom quality with alcohol inks. Argue with me if you want, but it doesn't matter what you layer on top of it, what kind of UV protection you provide for your piece. You can layer it with UV sprays and you can layer it with UV resin, but in the end it will fade and it will not be the same artwork that you put out, and it won't take very long to fade. I have a piece hanging in a business here in Bend that I created, maybe 4 years ago, and that piece has faded dramatically. You can almost not see the pinks in there at all. And that piece was sprayed several times with a UV protectant spray, and then has a couple of layers of UV protective resin on top. Resin has not yellowed, but the inks have faded. So number one, not archival, and I'm not into that. I like to create artwork that is going to be heirloom quality and is work that you can pass down. So that's one reason why I'm not into the inks anymore. Second, they're rather fumy. They stink. They give you a headache. You have to be in a very well ventilated space to use them, or wear some sort of respirator, and that's not conducive. All those sort of parameters are not really conducive to creating and trying to do new fresh things. So, they also require the use of 99% isopropyl alcohol, which is cheap and easy to get, but also very smelly. And then the sealing process, so all the various sprays and resins that you have to use also come with their own fumes and issues. So for my health, also backed off of the alcohol inks. I do love the look of them. I love how spontaneous and abstract you can get with them. There's things that you can do with them that you can't do with any other medium, and I've tried to replicate the look of alcohol inks with watercolors and other inks. It's just not possible. But, just given those few drawbacks that I listed, I don't think I'll be doing much with them in the future. I may pull them out for a month for my Patreon crowd, because I do a new medium every month, but we'll see. We'll see. I never say never, but I definitely won't be diving back into it to the extent that I was doing them several years ago. All right, next question. What's your secret to covering a painting with resin and not getting dust and fuzz, etc. in it? Good question. And that sort of follows the last question very nicely. I don't do a whole lot with resin these days, but I definitely will still work with it. The resin I use is absolutely non-toxic and zero VOC, so it's fairly safe to use, but I do prefer to use it in the warmer months. One, because of viscosity issues, and two, because then I can ventilate the studio. So the trick with resin is twofold. One, you have to release expectations of perfection, and I think that's the most important thing. If you become obsessed with every little fluff or dust piece that's going to fall into your resin pieces, all you will do is obsess over it and you will never be able to create anything worthwhile. So just try and have some perspective with the resin. Just realize that whatever artwork you create is meant to be viewed from a certain distance. The bigger the piece is, the further the distance will be, and any dust that settles in it will probably not even be noticed by the viewer. If you have a major problem with dust, here are a few tips to avoid getting it. One, make sure that there is no airflow in the room that you are working in. So I know you want ventilation and all of that, but for the few minutes that you are pouring the resin and for the time that it's going to take before it starts to cure, you want to make sure that the air is as still as possible and has been for a while. The second thing that I'll do is I'll take a fine mist spray bottle and I will just spray the entire room, and what that does is the little water particles will grab onto any dust or fluff in the air and bring it down to the ground. So I'll do that a few minutes before I start my session, and hopefully everything will have settled, the air is not moving, everything is nice and still, and then you can mix and pour your resin as quickly as possible. Third thing I will do, if the piece is small enough and conducive to it, I will tent some cardboard. I have like an amazing stash of Amazon boxes because I have a problem. So you can create little tents for your pieces to help mitigate any dust that might be flying around that would want to land on your piece. Larger pieces, I don't worry so much because honestly, I just can't afford to have that sort of anxiety around the artwork. And second, because I understand that people with a large piece will be standing way back, will not see the little dust. So I don't sweat the small things. I mean, even with my large pieces, I often get little dimples and imperfections in the resin, and I just let it go because really, as long as the overall impact of the piece is what I want, then everything else is just not a big deal. It's a handmade item. I pour the resin with my own hands. It's not perfect. I'm not a machine, so I don't sweat it. Okay, next question. Are you moving to Italy? So, for those of you who don't know, my husband and my children, my two girls, were just granted Italian citizenship. I am not Italian. I'm Japanese and Scandinavian, so I don't get that privilege, but as somebody who's married to an Italian citizen, I get a lot of perks. So we are allowed to live pretty much anywhere in the European Union at this point, and we don't have to deal with visas and have to leave and come back or whatever. And my oldest daughter is actually going to be going to college in Paris, France next year, so she will be taking advantage of it first. We do have plans to spend good amounts of time in Italy. I really have a long-term dream that my husband and I sort of concocted, and that is to own some acreage, large property with maybe sort of a barn on it that I can convert into a large communal studio, and from that space we would sort of run a B&B style and run sort of individual-led art retreats through that space. So it would be basically a sanctuary for you to come. We'd take care of you as your hosts, we'd feed you, we'd give you a nice place to stay, and then sort of let you do your art journey. We might do things like include classes and stuff like that. But anyway, infancy of this idea right now. We have not fully developed it, and it's kind of like a 10-year plan. I have a 10-year-old who needs to be raised and needs to flee the nest before we can start thinking these big grand dreams. But between now and the big dream, we plan to spend a lot of time there. It might just be summers, it might be 6 months here and there. But yes, that is a long-term plan for us and may become a permanent plan for us in the future. Very exciting. Okay, this is the last question, but it's like 5 questions, so I'm going to kind of break it up a little bit. I am wondering about developing artistic style. When did you feel that you had found your own personal artistic style? Okay, I'll stop it there and address that first. To be totally honest, I don't feel like I have found my personal artistic style. At the same time, I believe I've always had my own personal artistic style. I know that doesn't make much sense, but hear me out. Just personally, the way I see myself as an artist is as a perpetual student. I am always learning. and always humble. I always have something to gain from the wisdom of other artists and from trying new things. And this is kind of why I have forged this little niche for myself with this shifting and pivoting often thing. One, because I have the attention span of a gnat. Two, because I believe that the more things I dip my hands into, the better artist I will become. And for me, this is a very long game. I'm not retiring at 65. I plan to be an artist for the rest of my life, and I plan to just get better with age, like a fine wine. So I'm never fully developed, but I've always had a sort of personal style that, if you look closely, is a common thread throughout my artwork. I do create things that look vastly different depending on the medium I'm working in and the technique I'm using and the style that I'm trying, but there's usually some sort of common thread in sort of my color palette choices with my color theory background and in sort of the shapes and themes that I like to paint within. I do a lot of organic, nature-based inspired artwork and a lot of artwork that sort of speaks to mental health and personal growth and meditation and sort of my personal practice of being an artist, because it gives me peace and healing. So within that vein, I create in many different media and styles, and I'm okay with that. Some people really like to zero in on a very specific niche, and it's kind of what they do. The dangers in that, in my opinion, are that your artwork can become stale. You might sort of be trying something new and land on something that becomes very popular, and all of a sudden you're selling a bunch of artwork and you're getting a lot of attention and gaining a lot of traction and followers. And so you think, well, I better stick to this. I better just keep doing this because this is what's successful for me. And I believe when an artist has done that for long enough, it starts to show up in their work. Their work becomes less inspired and less fresh and doesn't say as much as it did in the beginning, which is oddly what strikes the chord with the audience. And so eventually the audience notices as well, and it sort of leads to this waxing and waning in a natural way. But I also admire artists who can really stick to something. I had so many people, including people I love dearly, tell me that I really needed to stick with the alcohol inks because it was making me good money and it was really what people wanted to see from me. And I just couldn't, because in my heart I knew that it wasn't where I wanted to land, and I'm not sure I ever want to land in a place with art. And there were all those other issues that I talked about earlier with the alcohol inks. So I guess my answer to that question is you're always developing your personal style, but you're also always bringing with it your voice. And as long as you stay true to your voice and you don't pander to anybody else's needs or wants or demands from you, it all comes from within, your voice will shine through no matter what you try. Let's see, does it have to do with confidence, and can it change when using different mediums? So the second part I kind of referred to a little bit. It does change with different media and techniques and styles, and that's okay, because your voice should shine through if you are doing this authentically and with intention. Confidence, yes. So confidence is absolutely necessary, but I don't know if I would use the word confidence so much as like fearlessness or an untethering or a detachment from the product, right? So if you can approach your artwork without expectation that it should be perfect or it should be something that you have up in here, if you can just approach it with sort of abandon and tell yourself whatever happens will be okay, I believe that you develop way more as an artist than you would if you are very rigid and expect a lot from yourself. And not only do you set yourself up for disappointment when you do that, but you also you strangle your creativity doing that. So really just detach yourself from outcome and throw yourself into it and don't think so much. And I think that's where that confidence comes in. Does it evolve, and can you foster their development? So yes, the work I am creating now is vastly different from the work I was creating, say, when I was, in my senior year of art school and doing my own sort of personal thesis. A lot of that thread has passed through because it's my personal voice, and my voice will always come through in my artwork, but definitely things have evolved and refined over the years, and they will continue to evolve and refine. I'm sure in 30 years I will look back at the work that I am producing in this moment and maybe even be horrified by how green it looks. Yes, so how can you foster development? Fostering development happens for me in various ways. I, like I said before, consider myself a perpetual student, always learning. Specifically, I watch a lot of YouTube videos and tutorials, and I watch people's IGTV, artists' IGTV feeds, and I pay attention and I draw inspiration. And when I say draw inspiration, I'm just going to be upfront with you. I mimic artists that I admire and I put my own voice in it. And I would never want my work to be derivative of somebody else's work, but I do draw inspiration from other artists, and I have no shame in that game because this is what artists have been doing for as long as there have been artists. They steal from each other and it's perfectly okay. There's a book called How to Steal Like an Artist. Highly recommend it. You know, the gray area lies in how much you draw from an artist and whether you fail to inject your own voice in there. And that's when the problems stem up. Is if you are so focused on imitating somebody else's work that you lose your own voice in that. So delicate balance. But yes, there are ways to develop. So just be a perpetual student, be influenced by others, but remember you have your voice. Use art as a therapeutic tool, and then you can release sort of expectations and release yourself from the notion that you have to create for somebody else. You really should be creating for yourself, and those are all ways to keep developing as an artist. You can get to the point where you create for I take commissions all the time. I'm always creating for other people, but I also make sure that I preserve and I keep time sacred for development, and that is just creating purely for me. I may or may not sell what I create. You guys have seen just a fraction of what I create because I don't share at all. A lot of it is just personal development and practice. So just be a perpetual student. That's all I can say. I sound like a broken heart, but just keep learning. Keep your eyes open, stay humble, and you'll continue to develop. And there's no timeline. You develop forever. You develop until you are done painting or breathing, in my case. And that's how it goes. All right, so that's it for Q&A this time. Like I said before, if you have any more questions, if anything I said sparks more questions, feel free to ask down there, or hop over to my Patreon and ask there. There are really no boundaries around questions you can ask. If I don't want to answer it, I'll let you know. But for the most part, if it's respectful and it's coming from a purely curious place, I will answer any question. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.